there's a few too many, but there's a lot of letters. This is part of the problem with my business card, they don't fit. So yeah, I'm an architect. I'm registered in Queensland and New South Wales. I have 4 higher education qualifications as well as other bits and pieces. And I'm also a registered rail industry worker, which is a little bit unusual for an architect. Some of my additional professional development or qualifications and the things that I have achieved for my company, I have ISO certification, which is for quality, safety and environment, which is a very expensive and very convoluted process to get approval for, but it basically says that I can deliver projects at a level of standard that's higher there for government projects. It's an international standard and it's expensive, and I have to keep paying every year to renew that.
And well done.
Thank
We
you.
went through that as a company years ago, and I know it must have been a nightmare for you.
Yeah, I got that last year, and it's something you have to maintain. So there's a lot of money that's been sunk into that. But professionally speaking, I have 27 years experience in the industry, and I started studying at 17 and working at 18. And I've worked my way from a technician right through to the top, and in practically every company I've worked at, I've ended up having to come in and do business development, help them get systems in place, be all things to all people. So for me, it was a matter of going, I know what needs to happen for projects to be run well, for businesses to be run well, and I'm just not going to do a half-assed job. So for me, it's all about doing it well and doing it right, because you get the best outcomes that way. So some of the other things that I take time to learn and develop in the property development space. Flipping houses, property development. I have an elite mentor program that I'm in at the moment. I also look at business turnaround and real estate rescue, which is about rescuing businesses and properties that might be in distress. I was looking into that last year to help me put a proposal together for boosting female founders, which is a federal government funding program, and I didn't quite get that last year, but I did get a mentoring grant, which I think I've got a bullet point about. And in fact, I don't know if any women applied for that this year. They just released the announcements for successful stage 2 applicants and accidentally sent out, congratulations, you're successful, to 1,800 applicants who were unsuccessful. And they had to retract and apologise very poorly to what I had. So yeah, I've done a number of business accelerators and all this boring stuff. But anyway, and business and practice of architecture is actually also something that I did as an undergraduate, which was a unique program that the Institute of Architects rolled out for the QUT program that I was doing, and it really was foundational training that I had for myself in business, but also in architecture, because for architecture it's a 6+ year degree. You generally have to work while you're studying, and it's very much around the art and science of buildings, or heavily around design, and not necessarily around how do you run a business and how do you do it successfully. So there's the whole business side of architecture as well as engineering. So some of the things that I've done in the architecture space are residential, civic buildings, train stations in New South Wales and Queensland, education buildings, urban design projects, shopping centres, heritage, accessibility and safety, and there's probably a shitload more in there. If you really want to see my resume, it's pretty long. I've just bunged a few photos in here. I don't have a lot of my design photos. I've had to have a backup file, have data recovery, and I've had a burst water pipe that ruined a heap of originals. So I'm in the process of recovering information. But architecturally, I'd really love to do another presentation another time on what is architecture, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the industry around design, interior decoration, building design, draftspeople and architecture, and what's the difference. And an architect is responsible for the full spectrum of a project. So we have to understand the building, we go onto site, we have to understand construction things, we administer the contract, we have to do surveying, materials engineering, psychology, law, a whole range of things that you do when you're studying. You're not just drawing pretty pictures, trees and people, which is often what people think we do. But you know, and to be a registered architect, it's a very arduous process, and to actually call yourself an architect, you need to be licensed. You have to have done a degree program, you have to have logged 3,000 plus hours, sat an exam that's really complicated and more about law than anything else, and and then pass an interview to make sure that you're not going to misrepresent the profession. So we're at the level of professional qualification that you would think of a lawyer or a surgeon or something like that. We have a code of conduct, we have professional obligations that we must abide by, and it's quite complicated. And in fact, I was sent on a bit of a spin in the last week because the New South Wales Registration Board sent me an email saying it's come to our attention that Kaleidoscope Creative has been providing architectural services in New South Wales and you haven't nominated anyone as a nominated architect. And I had to bring them and talk them through the situation because my company in the last 6 years in New South Wales didn't provide architecture, I provided project management services. And there's a blurry line between what is architecture and what is project management. I've been on the client side delivering large complex projects from an architectural background. I've deliberately not been designing anything in those roles. I've been managing teams of people who've been doing that and making sure that the client gets what they need. But that's not architecture in the pure sense of architecture. So I had to defend my position on that. That was potentially a $135,000 fine, possibly per year, for the 6 years that my business has been registered if they didn't agree with my interpretation of the Act in that space. Not only that, if Rob had been telling people that I was an architect and Kaleidoscope Creative was providing architectural services and somebody called him to account on that, he could have also been fined $135,000. So it's at a high level of legislation that people don't fully understand. So anyway, I hope that
Did
sets
you
the
win?
scene. I did win.
Hey.
Yeah, that was a very stressful couple of days, I have to say. So
I
thank you.
didn't, by the way.
But I had to explain to them that I've come to Queensland and I've had to reinvent what my business services look like, and at the end of it, I'm an architect. I know how to do all this stuff. It's what I've done from the beginning to the end, and I have done that process for Queensland. And so I'm good to go, but not for New South Wales. So and this was my dilemma that I said to them, and they're like, but you're registered in New South Wales. And I went, yes, because I lived and worked in New South Wales, but I didn't provide architecture independently, except for where I was employed. And I said, so the reason I've wanted to maintain this professionally is because I live on the Gold Coast. New South Wales is just like half an hour away. So if I get a project in New South Wales, what then? And they went, oh, we get you. So they've put a big note in my file. But anyway, so I'm legal, I'm good to go. But the point is there's a lot of engineering that goes into projects, there's a lot of compliance, there's a lot of responsibility. We're responsible for designing buildings safely so that they're safe to build, clean, operate, maintain, construct, like commission, decommission. And if we don't, that's actually a criminal liability. It's not anything that insurance can cover. We are liable for that. So if you think about the Grenfell building fires in London, or the lacrosse fire that happened in Melbourne a few years back, really, really, really big issue. Because somebody is liable for bad design decisions, and if they can see that you are negligent in your decision making of picking materials for a building or poor fire engineering, somebody is going to get fined for that, and you can actually go to prison. It's a criminal thing. So there's a lot to what we have to do. Just FYI. Anyway, that's yeah. So I've done a lot of infrastructure projects, which is rather boring and rather engineering-y, but I think the fact that I started as a technician, as a 17-year-old, and that was after high school, with 5 years of tech drawing already. I have a very mechanical mind. So I've been able to sit in positions and roles and responsibilities and lead teams where, in this team, I was the only architect, the only female almost only female in a massive design road rail infrastructure project that was a $1.6 billion project in Brisbane, the Darras-Greenfield road rail corridor extension. And to oversee that project, this is a car park in here. I was brought in to fix the car park documentation for 2 weeks. I ended up on the project for nearly 3 years. And then led the project and then rolled through for stage 2. But there's also elements that come into play here with public art. And this is the art on the side of the corridor, and we had to facilitate community engagement. There was multiple different art components that included Aboriginal art and consultation. And on that project, I wasn't designing it, but I was representing, I guess, designers from an architectural and engineering point of view, so that we got outcomes that could be cleaned, would be safe, couldn't be vandalised, couldn't provide a climbing hole for somebody to climb into the corridor. So there's a whole heap of other considerations that if you didn't know, you would have got a different outcome from the design, from an art point of view. And that was actually submitted for an architectural award. Didn't win, but that's partly because it was up against churches. I mean, how do you compare? Interior design, so architecture, interior design, project management, a whole heap of interiors things, amenities, refurbs in shopping centres, furniture design for bespoke houses, office fit outs, all sorts of bits and pieces, wallpaper selections, that's the fun stuff. So this is some befores, a unit for my cousin in Melbourne, and she didn't want to pay my fee, so she went and managed it herself, and it took 2 years to, that's the before, 2 years to deliver the design that I gave her, and I just was like, all right then, you can do it. But, you know, she really needed a project manager because it just dragged on and on and on, and it cost her a lot of money in time and mortgage and stuff that she was paying for without being able to live there or have a flatmate. And that's actually my other cousin in her place in Oxford in London, and she's like, can you bring some wallpaper over for me and help me choose some interiors things? So I did. In terms of specialist management, some of the things, and this is where the space I've been working in Sydney and Canberra for the last 6 years, high level interface management roles for mostly government departments and large projects. Technical manager, design manager, project manager, interface manager. Ask me later what that means, it's all too complicated. But why so serious? Now for the quirky stuff. I hope I'm not taking too long. So, Boosting Female Founders Mentor Grant last year. I've been a recipient of a 12-month program with Rare Birds. I'm a Guinness World Record holder.
What?
You'll see in a sec. I have been a Bondi, sorry?
The most amount of beers sculled.
You're on the right track, but not quite alcohol. But anyway, Bondi Surf Lifesaver for the last 5 years before I came back here to the Gold Coast. So I've got a bronze medallion, surf rescue, advanced resus first aid. I need to get back in the water though. And I was a Gold Coast a volunteer at the Commonwealth Games. Did anyone hear the announcement last night?
Yeah.
Yay! That's awesome. My sister worked at Commonwealth Games and London Olympics. She came back to work on Commonwealth Games, and she said to me, you should put your hat in the ring to be a volunteer. They need like 14,000. You can come up to, I was in Sydney, come up and stay with me for a couple of weeks. And there's a few unusual roles that they never advertise because there's not enough of them. But if you put what your skills are in, you might get one. And I did. I got one of 26 roles out of 14,000 volunteers. And I was part of the event control room, and I was the medic representative in the event control room. So I was the only volunteer person in the hockey control room for my shift. And there were only 26 of us around all of the venues, and we were there to sit next to the Queensland Ambulance head person who was responsible for dealing with any emergencies that came in. So if the volunteer medics on the field or on the site or in the crowds had an emergency, they'd bring it through. We would then have to coordinate with the medical services. Pretty cool. So I've been an MC and host for events. I do community theatre and done quite well at that. I've done a few acting, performance, writing, and I love swimming. So, part of the biggest group of people dressed up as Spider-Man in a public place is my Guinness World Record that I did with my son.
Next week, we're going to see you.
Now, does that do? I do actually still have it, don't know where it is. My son was happy to be wagging school for the day to come and join me in Sydney for this. And performing in a play where my first ever public performance, and we won our heat and came third in the final, and we were the People's Choice as well. Surf lifesaving, I love a bit of quirky stuff. That was a fancy dress thing that I made for a labyrinth themed party. That's at the Commonwealth Games with some of the gold medal winners. And I'm always a bit of a rat bag. That's me on patrol dressed up as the naughty elf at Christmas. And that's my son, and that's my sister. Yeah, I have a son, I'm a mum. And my lucky door prize, I decided that I'd like to give a choice. You can have a bottle of wine, a prepaid coffee voucher for here, or if it's of interest, a 2-hour interior design consult for kitchens or, your workspace or your high-end colours. Thank you.
Thank you.